Welcome back to the Mountain Morning Show. I've been looking forward to this interview all day long. Dr. Brad Reedy, owner and clinical director of Evoke therapy programs. You have a really cool program going on for kids with mental issues and addiction. But today we are talking about raising resilient kids in today's society and all the challenges in today's society. Right. Very important conversation to be having.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Okay, let's get right down to it. What are some of the challenges kids are facing today?
You know, I think with the proliferation of social media and everything's moving so fast for them, there's a lot of pressure to succeed. There's a lot of pressure on families really to produce children that are high achievers. And so it's like they're in a fishbowl, a psychological fishbowl where all of these pressures are leaning in on them. And resiliency is going to be the key to kind of overcoming those challenges that today's societies present. There's also a lot of access to drugs today that there wasn't when we were growing up. So that adds to the equation, of course, a real difficulty.
I mean, have we always had to have thick skin? I mean, is this just being talked about more, or is this newer with the newer, challenges, things going on today?
You know, I think we've always had to have resiliency, but I think the development that I talk about is it's different to not feel, to not be sensitive. And then today's generation, we're trying to create children who feel. And so how do you foster a feeling, empathic, sensitive child, and at the same time not expose them to a kind of vulnerability that will be overwhelming for them? So yes, in generations past, people were good at kind of having that thick skin, and today we're asking for something quite different. A sensitive, aware, empathic child, but somebody who's not overwhelmed by the challenges that are facing them.
Which is a perfect balance, really. We're asking for our kids to be extremely emotionally mature because they have to face a lot more than we did as kids. Let's talk about the biggest thing that you are doing today. I mean, this is about your speech coming up. We'll get to that. Anyway, educating parents.
Right.
Why would we educate parents? I mean, is it our fault?
Right.
You know, I mean, what do we need to know?
I think the first thing that happens when I introduce myself as a parent educator is there's an implication that parents are to blame. And my work, my education is about compassion. Any limitation that a parent has comes from their own wounds, right? And I think there's a lot of judgment towards parents these days. They have labels like helicopter parents and over-involved. If those are problems, those come from some kind of wound, some kind of family of origin trauma of theirs. And so it really is treating the parents like a child also. So it's not a blame, but it's a willingness to look at the entire system, which in my opinion does take a lot of courage. And I call it heroic parenting, to be able to look at oneself in the process. And it doesn't, I say this, parent education does not change children, it changes parents.
Okay.
And that change can have a wonderful impact on the child. Right.
So when you have a parent come in and they're saying we're having all these family issues, what is the first thing you say to them?
You're not alone. And oftentimes sharing my story, my challenges as a parent, my challenges as a teenager, just to give them some exposure to the fact that everybody loves somebody who's struggling with mental health issues or addiction. Everybody. And so those walls that we build up to protect ourselves from judgment and stigma are also the walls that separate us from connecting to each other.
This is so interesting because I feel like in today's society we know of a lot of, problem kids or different suicide in teenagers, addiction, mental health problems. They seemingly are widespread. It's because we're hearing about it a lot more. I mean, how do we avoid those things? As a parent, you don't want your child to go through a major struggle, but it seems inevitable. And how do you treat it? I mean, how do you even manage a kid who's going through struggles?
You know, I work in the treatment field, and so I'm working with kids who have those kinds of issues. But the same kind of principles that apply to treatment apply to prevention. So it's really about attachment. It's about seeing the child through any struggle. And a child who's struggling is trying to say something. They can't say it with their words, but they're saying, whatever the soup that we're cooking in this family, it's not working for me. And so it's giving parents new ears and new eyes to see their children, and fear and shame and anxiety block the capacity of a parent to see a child when they see them struggling. So you're really helping a parent develop the capacity to see a child, and that makes all the difference in the world, being able to see a child.
What kinds of changes do you see parents making? How do they make that change?
I think the shift becomes changing from making the child the project to fix to making themselves the project.
That might be tough to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're saying they're coming in and saying, my kid is doing this, this, and this,
Right.
and you're saying, well, what are you doing?
And I think that my wife just wrote a letter to my son just last week. My son is on a wilderness trek right now. And it was a profound sentence she said. She said, I recognize that some of the things that we're asking you to let go of, some of the defenses, some of the things that serve to protect you, were in part caused by us. And that's really powerful to say to a child, to be vulnerable. The best way to help a child drop the walls, drop the defenses, is to lower your own. And so if nothing else, by inviting parents and asking them to be vulnerable, they know what it feels like to be asked to do that. They're asking their children to do that. And that kind of connection, that kind of modeling is gold.
Okay, here's a question, somewhat personal, but when I grew up, I kind of partied in high school,
Right.
Everyone kind of goes through that phase. But I was honest with my parents. At first I wasn't, and that's, I think, what led me to be honest with them. So I would be honest and say, hey, I'm gonna be drinking tonight, so I'm not gonna drive. And they had a good balance of showing that they were disappointed,
Right.
but also accepting. And
Right.
I don't know how to strike that balance. I mean, I feel like my child is 5 months old, but
Right.
I could be practicing now. How do you strike the balance of like showing the boundaries, showing the guidelines? You want to be stern, but at the same time, you want your child to feel comfortable telling you things so that you can help them.
That's a great question. Recognizing what you do or don't do that makes it safe for your child to talk to you is very important. And so you had a phrase in there about your parents showing that disappointment. What we know about addiction and mental health is that, of course, children that struggle are going to trigger feelings like that in parents, but this is really important. You don't show that to them to any great extent. You go take care of your disappointment, anxiety, fears over here, so when you can talk to the child, when you come back to the child, you can be there for them. I think one of the biggest mistakes that parents make is believing that the child is responsible for my serenity. Like, I'm scared, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm disappointed in what you're doing, so do differently so I feel okay.
So how do you show them it's okay, but at the same time, you wish they weren't doing that? I mean, you wanna tell them how you would live your own life,
Right.
how you would hope that they live theirs,
Right.
but also help them through it.
Boundaries, really, like you talked about boundaries, having good boundaries, but as strange as this might sound, we don't want our children to do what we want them to do in a way. Like, if we wire our children to care about what we think, this is really important. We're really wiring them toward peer pressure. So when other people want or think something about them, they've been wired to think, oh, that's something I need to meet. We spend our lives as adults trying to not care what people think.
Right.
And the genesis of that issue is when parental expectations, energy, when we're handed it and we take it on. So boundaries, clarity, there's teaching, of course, that involved, but laying your emotions on the child to any significant level is not helpful in the process. So it's that other stuff. Take care of your anxiety over here so that when you come to the child, it's for them and not for you.
I love how your focus is really on the parents.
Yeah.
And fix yourself before you try to fix your kid. I really like that. Let's talk about the program that you host. You do a wilderness program for kids.
Right, we have 2 wilderness therapy programs, one in southern Utah, one in Bend, Oregon, and it's taking kids that are struggling with these kinds of issues, taking them into a new context, small group living, nomadic, primitive living, and doing therapy. So it's kind of camping therapy. And that sets up a different kind of context for both the parents and the child. Our work, what we contributed to the process, was adding the parent education and support process, giving them the compassion and help so that we can give them something that they can carry forward after the program.
How do people get involved with the camping therapy? I like that phrase.
They find that online or through educational consultants or through a school counselor or a home therapist who knows about it. That's how actually I became involved, is a home therapist told me that this existed before I knew it existed.
Very cool. All right, and you have a book with you.
Right.
You are the author of this book.
Right.
It's called The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Can I hold it up? Is that all right? You talked about the heroic parent. What does that mean to you? What can people learn from this book?
It's borrowed from Joseph Campbell's model. He's a modern philosopher, and he talked about the fact that no matter what the story is, in myth and storytelling. Star Wars was based on the hero's journey, that the heroic journey is inward. And so we might think we're going to find the widget. King Arthur's knights went to find the Holy Grail. But the real experience was meeting their own fears and challenges. And what they came back with, what parents come back with, is a different self through this process. They go into the woods, metaphorically and literally in our case, they go into the woods to save their child, and we accept that premise, but what they come out with is a new self. And that makes the difference.
I really, really like your focus on parents. I think, we create the foundation for our families, and we create the foundation for our kids. And we should be looking at ourselves first before trying to fix our kids.
Right.
I love this. Well, Brad, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed this conversation. As a new parent, I'm always looking for different philosophies.
Sure. Good
I'm
luck.
a little ways away from a teenager, but like I said.
You can have the book.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, thank you so much. Brad Reedy with Evoke Therapy Programs. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back with more Mountain Morning Show right after this break.